I'm Nicole Robert. I'm the Public Programs Manager here at MOHAI in Seattle, Washington, and we're so happy to have so many of you joining us from all over. We normally have behind the scenes at MOHAI in very small groups so that people can get close to the garments in our collection. But during this time, we're excited that we can bring you a special version of behind the scenes that so many more of you can attend here through Zoom. This is our very first digital one, and we've been enjoying offering digital programs while the museum is closed. If you have enjoyed those programs or you're excited to see these offerings, please consider making a gift to MOHAI to support programs like this and future programs and help us sustain beyond this unforeseen closure. And thank you to all of the donors who've already shown their support. We just celebrated Give Big. We had a great deal of wonderful support. So thank you everybody for pitching in and making sure that we can continue to bring you programs like this at MOHAI. We want to let you know that you will have a chance to ask questions during this program. So after each presentation about a particular garment, there will be a pause and you'll have a chance to pose questions. You may notice that you are muted, so questions will be posed through the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window. And I will be asking those questions to Clara for you throughout the program. However, the chat box is open, so feel free to make comments and chat to each other throughout the program in the chat box. And just a final reminder, make sure to pick all panelists and attendees. We love seeing your questions, but I'm sure everybody else would love to see your comments in the chat box as well. Your questions go in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. So to get us going, I also wanted to introduce Rachel Spence. Rachel is the public programs developer, and she's going to be behind the scenes monitoring chat and email. So feel free to make your inquiries. If you're joining us on the phone, so you're audio only, you can send questions via email at programs@mohai.org, and we will be sure to include those. This program is being recorded, so we will make it available online tomorrow, and you can share it with your friends or revisit a favorite garment. Before we begin the program tonight, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that here at MOHAI, we are gathered today on the historic and contemporary lands of the Duwamish, Suquamish, and all Coast Salish people. We acknowledge the forced displacement of Native communities from this land, while honoring the endurance of the Duwamish people who still live here. To this day, the Duwamish people have yet to receive federal recognition. If you are local, we encourage you to visit the Duwamish Longhouse and Cultural Center in West Seattle and learn more. And if you're not local, we encourage you to learn more about the Indigenous history of your location. And now I'm happy to introduce our speaker tonight, my colleague and MOHAI's wonderful Curator of Collections, Clara Berg. Clara curated MOHAI's 2019 exhibit, Seattle Style Fashion Function, and currently manages MOHAI's collection of roughly 100,000 3D artifacts. She received her MA in Costume and Textile Studies at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City. So let's give Clara a virtual applause. Welcome.
All right, well, thank you. I'm gonna see, oops, put my, okay. Welcome everyone, and as Nicole said, thank you so much for joining us for this kind of experimental online behind the scenes. I'm Clara, and I've been doing the behind the scenes program for about 5 years now. This is what it usually looks like. It's a program in one of our conference rooms, and I pick items from the collection that are on a particular theme and bring them out and lay them out on a table, have them hanging up, have people be able to see the inside details and, you know, front and back, kind of a 360 view of these garments. And as we were thinking about how could we move this program digitally, obviously one of the big perks of Behind the Seams is that it's an in-person program. But one of the other perks is that you get an experience with the items that you wouldn't get even if they were on display. Because when garments are on display, you get kind of one view of them. You can't see the inside, you sometimes can't see the back. And you also, even in the Behind the Scenes program, can't get that close to the artifacts because we have to protect them. You can't breathe too heavy on them. And so for the Seattle Style exhibit, we took a lot of really beautiful high-res images of the garments that we had on display. Many of those images haven't been publicly available. We just took a whole bunch of them, potentially what we're going to use for the book and for exhibit. And so we have some really nice detail shots that are way closer than really you'd be able to get even in a Behind the Scenes program. So that was kind of the idea behind this, of getting some extra special close-up looks at some of these garments. You also might notice, I'm realizing my hair is going in and out of the picture, but I have this Zoom backdrop, and I'll talk more about this at the end of the program, but we're trying something new tonight. At the end of the program, we have an offer of, if you'd like to buy some of the digital images from this program, we have a package of 8 images available for $20, which is actually a huge bargain from what we usually have for our digital photo sales. And they're for personal use, like a Zoom backdrop. So I'll talk more about that, but that's something we're just trying out to see if there's interest, and a great way to support MOHAI. As Nicole mentioned, there is a Q&A. So you can type your questions in the Q&A box at any time, and Nicole will then kind of look through them and pose them to me at the various stopping points. So I think I'm ready to go on to our first garment. So when we first came up with the idea of doing this program, this is the first piece that I wanted to talk about. This is a dress from around 1911 that was owned by Helen Igoe, who was a shop owner in Seattle. She owned a store from about 1910 to 1950. And so this dress was kind of from early on in her career. And she was making annual buying trips to Paris and to London, which in the 1910s and 1920s was no easy feat to go from Seattle to Paris. And what I really love about this dress is it's very of the period. And one of the things, it has all of these, it's made up of all these beautiful layers in the garment. So here's the first close-up. So the first kind of basic layer of this dress is this incredible bright blue silk satin. And then on top of that, which you can kind of see underneath the black overlayer, is some gold colored lace. And so between this bright blue silk satin and this gold lace, you have the makings for a very gaudy dress. But then there's this black layer of netting with this embroidery on it that kind of adds this refinement and adds this elegance to it. And also I like how this netting goes up above the line of the nextmost layer, so that her skin would kind of be like another layer of the garment, because there'd be a distinct difference between, the uncovered skin above and then this little slip of skin underneath the netting. So creating, adding that as part of this like layered experience and look of this garment. So this is a picture of Helen in 1926, so about 15 years after she would have worn this dress. And the other thing I really love about this dress and about Helen Igoe's story is that she was born in the 1880s and lived in a time when, there weren't really options for women. It was very uncommon for women to be business people. And, if you weren't married by the time you were 25, you might as well be dead. Nobody cared about you. So Helen Igoe was someone who was unmarried and in her 30s moved to Seattle and began this career in the fashion industry. And so that sort of the heyday years of her life were her 40s, her 50s, her 60s, which was just kind of not what was expected at the time. And what I love about the dress too is that I think it kind of plays with this sort of, a lot of dresses at the time, there would be sort of a lot of very sweet pastel kind of youthful dresses for ingenues, unmarried ingenues. And then there'd be more kind of serious dresses for matrons and for widows. And I feel like this dress kind of plays with, there's a youthful exuberance to it with the bright blue and the gold, and then there's sort of refinement that's added with the black, because she's really crossing a lot of boundaries about who a woman was supposed to be in the early 20th century. But the real best part of this dress is the sleeves. And you can see on the left the sort of farther back view, and then the close-up of that there's what sort of looks like jewels on the sleeves. And then when you get super up close, you realize that they're actually these tiny coils, pieces of metal that have this iridescent sheen to them, coiled back and forth to create this kind of jewel-like decoration. And then around each of them is gold thread, and it's very hard to see, but you can see the light catching a couple of them, but there's actually chains of tiny black sequins around each of these jewels as well. I think you can see my cursor as I'm doing this. So there's actually chains of black sequins. And again, this is something that whoever designed this dress, you know, in the wrong hands, sequins and iridescent metal and gold could have made a very gaudy dress. But it's all handled it's handled very well to be very elegant and very refined. You can also notice on the sleeve, over on the left image, that there's it's very open at the top of the sleeve. That's actually because the embellishment was so heavy that there was some damage on this garment when we first found it in the collection. And so this is conservation work that we're seeing, so that we had a conservator fill this in with some supportive netting in the lost areas, so that the whole sleeve would have been decorated with kind of gold colored and blue colored decorations. But this is conservation work, kind of protecting the sleeve and filling it in. So I'm going to pause now and see if there's any questions about this particular dress.
All right, thanks, Clara. One question, does it appear that all 3 layers were original to the dress, or were layers added successively?
That's a good question. As far as I am able to tell, all of those layers look original to the dress. There's not an obvious way for one of them to be removed or to come out. One thing that is kind of interesting that's sort of hard to tell on the skirt is that there is the blue fabric stops at one point, and so then there is black silk on the bottom, and so where that is, there's like clearly a seam there, and with the black overlayer, that's clearly very intentional, that would kind of hide the difference between the black and the blue. So as far as I can tell, that all of the layers are original to the dress.
Great. One person is wondering how this dress came to our collection.
Oh, another great question. I'll go back. So I have on the beginning of the slides the donor, and so this is her sister, Miss Louise Igo, gave this dress. Helen was from a large Catholic family. I think she had like 10 or 11 or maybe even 12 siblings. And she was one of the older siblings, and her younger sister, Louise, later came out to Seattle and helped in the store, and she and Helen lived together. So Louise outlived Helen and donated this dress to the collection.
Okay, we have a few questions about the construction of the dress. What is the fabric composition? Any poly or all natural?
This definitely is all natural. This is before the invention of polyesters, and see, I'm trying to remember exactly when rayon was invented, but this is pre. I have very confident that this is all pre-synthetic materials.
Great, thank you. And there's a few questions about the beading. Wondering what it's made of, what kind of metal is present, are the sequins metallic, or is this an early celluloid?
The sequins are, from my recollection, are probably an early type of plastic. They don't seem to be super heavy, which they were metal or another material. I don't know the composition of the metal. One thing that can be really tough, you know, that a lot of that sort of stuff would require lab tests and expertise and a conservation lab facilities that we don't have. So I don't know a lot about what exactly this metal is, other than that it has some kind of iridescent treatment on it.
And then a question about the white part of the end of the sleeve. Was that an add-on?
That is the only part that could potentially be an add-on, because it is just this kind of white lace that comes out from from underneath. It goes together with the dress really well, so there's not a particular reason to think that it's added on. But of all of the layers, that would be one that would probably be the most easy to kind of add or take off. All the rest are really have to go together and are connected in the dress.
One person's wondering where you would wear a dress like this. Or where would you wear this dress?
Well, this dress is definitely an evening dress. This is sort of Edwardian era, and it still follows a lot of the Victorian era rules about times of day dressing. So roughly, you would wear a dress with a higher neck and long sleeves in the morning. Afternoon dresses could have either a lower neck or sort of shorter sleeves, but kind of not too much of either. And then evening dresses could have lower necks and short sleeves. Someone like Helen, who was in her 40s at this time, you could get away with maybe shorter sleeves than this if you were younger, but it would be appropriate to have, these would be above the elbow. So it's a not super plunging neckline, it's not super short sleeves. Maybe if it's a really formal afternoon event, you could get away with this, but most likely this would be an evening dress.
Great. And we've got several questions about where her store was located, or wondering if you could tell us more about her store.
Sure. Her store was located, moved a couple different times. The place it was the longest, which I'm realizing, I think that building was just torn down but it was where Fox's Jewelry was for a long time, kind of near the Rainier Tower, across the street from Brooks, I think it was Brooks, it's still Brooks Brothers. It was Eddie Bauer for a while. That's on the corner of 5th and Union. So John Doyle Bishop, which many people have heard, if you've gone to more than one of my talks, you've heard me talk about him. He took over her store and renamed it after himself. And so it became John Doyle Bishop in 1950. And then he moved across the street to the location that is now Brooks Brothers. So Helen's location had been just across the street from there. The most recently, Fox's Jewelry was on that corner. But that building has been brand new long since she was there.
Okay, we get one last question about this dress. Where was it made?
That's a good question. So at this time, it's not that common to find labels in things. So we don't have a label in this dress. It is very beautifully made. It's very interesting. And she was making trips to Paris. So it's not out of the question that this would have been something that she acquired in Europe on one of her trips. It also potentially could have been made in New York. She would have made trips there. Most likely it would not be made in Seattle. In general, she was bringing garments in from kind of the fashion capitals of the world at the time. And then things might be altered in her shop, and she would have had seamstresses that might have altered this for her, but she probably would have purchased this in Europe or in New York.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's move on. It's such a good questions, I'm thrilled. Okay, so the next piece that I was going to talk about is our most functional of the ones that I brought today, or have on the screen today. So this is a hunting jacket. Well, the picture on the left is a jacket and pants, but I'm going to focus on the jacket. So this is a hunting jacket from Filson, which is a local company that's still in business. They were founded during the gold rush years in 1897. And after the gold rush, they had this, during the gold rush, they had this strong reputation for kind of hardy, well-made clothes. And so after the gold rush, they branched out into other sort of outdoor professions that they supplied, loggers being one of the biggest, but then also people who had recreational time and wanted to go out and enjoy the outdoors, and supplying clothes for those people. So when I worked on the Seattle Style exhibit, one of the really fun things is I got to meet all these people in the clothing industry in Seattle. And I met Nathan Gray, who works at Filson as the product specialist, which sort of means that he's a fashion, or the historian for Filson. So I brought him a picture of this jacket to kind of learn more about it. And he kind of was like, he recognized it right away. He said, oh, that's Filson's classic hunting jacket. It first appeared in our 1922 catalog. It may have been produced before that, but for sure 1922 was when it was first made. And he was pointing out all of the features of it. And he said, and you know, like there's the pocket that you can access from the front between the buttons. And I kind of gave him a blank look, and I didn't know what he was talking about. And he said, yeah, when you go back, see if you can open up the button between the buttons. So sure enough, there is a hidden pocket. And in fact, the whole jacket has an interior cavity. It's got 2 layers. So you can put your hand into that part, and it actually goes all the way down into a pocket in the back. This is a hunting jacket. So the purpose of that is that if you have killed a bird and you want to take it home, you can put it in the front of your jacket, and it'll slide down and go to the back of your jacket. And then you can take it out. There's pockets in the back that make it easier to take those out. So that's a common thing. There's other kinds of hunting jackets called a game pocket. If that image is a little grim for you of having dead animals in your jacket, we do have reason to think that this particular jacket was actually not ever used for hunting. And the reason is, the other thing that Nathan saw right away is this pocket that's on the wearer's right shoulder. It's on the left of our image. And he said, that's strange. That must have been a custom order. You see that there's actually an almost identical pocket that's on the wearer's left side. And he said that that usually would be used for the hunting license. That was usually like a small button or a little piece of paper, and that would be a perfect spot to keep your hunting license. But it's very odd to have a pocket on the right shoulder, because that's usually where you would, where the gun would rest. And it's a really bad idea to try to store anything right in that spot where the gun would kind of recoil when you were shooting. So it's a terribly impractical thing for hunting. So this jacket must have been a custom order and a custom request from the customer. We don't know what purpose, but that he wanted a pocket there, and it implies that he had some other intention for this jacket. Which is also, you know, just because it was designed for hunting doesn't mean you have to wear it for hunting. One of Filson's most popular products to this day is their Mackinac cruiser jacket, which is a wool plaid coat that was made for the timber, people in the timber industry. And these days, I would guess that there's a pretty tiny percentage of timber industry people, of all of their clients, you know, people just wear it because it's a cool jacket. So we don't know what it was used for, but most likely it would be very impractical for hunting because of that pocket. But the most charming feature of this jacket is the buttons. They have little hunting dog buttons. And if you're having trouble orienting yourself, this is the eye. It's a profile image of the dog. So this is its nose, and then it's got this big floppy ear on the right side of the button. And it's just kind of a very charming little animal button on this hunting jacket. So I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions about this Filson jacket.
We do have questions.
Great.
A couple of questions about materials. One about the buttons. Opening with, I love the buttons. What are they made of?
I don't know exactly what kind of metal, but they are definitely metal, and they do appear to probably some sort of pressed design is from what it looks like. I'm not a metalsmith, so I don't know, but they're definitely metal buttons.
What about the fabric? Can you tell us what the fabric is made out of?
It is cotton. And one thing that we were wondering when we did Seattle Style, but we weren't ever able to determine, is whether it had originally been a waxed cotton, which is one of Filson's specialties. Either it was never a waxed cotton, or it was waxed earlier on in their, they have a much more refined method for waxing cotton that's a lot more permanent. This doesn't have any remnants of wax on it. It really is just kind of a heavy cotton canvas. So also if you were using it for hunting, it would be very washable.
Related to waxing, a question wanting to know if the jacket's waterproof.
If it had been waxed originally, it would definitely have some waterproof properties. Currently, it would not be waterproof. Maybe lightly water resistant because it's a very thick, you know, good strong weave, but it's a heavy cotton jacket.
And how expensive were clothes during this time period compared to other goods?
That comes up later too. Clothes tended to be a lot more expensive just because things were mostly made in the US. Cost of materials was a lot higher. So Filson, today people think of Filson as very expensive because a lot of their stuff starts in the $200 range. There's things that they have that are $300, $400 for jackets. In proportion, that actually, in terms of like inflation, and if you were to kind of translate that money back, their prices probably haven't changed that much, but it just used to be a lot more normal to spend, you know, the equivalent of $200, $300, $400 on a piece of clothing, but then you wouldn't have a closet of 50 of them. You know, this would be like your one hunting jacket that you would invest in and it would last you for 10 or more years. There was, as things began moving overseas and sort of cost of labor, so Filson still manufactures in Seattle, which is one of the reasons that their costs are so much higher. And so things did used to cost in general a lot more in the past.
Thank you. I know we talked about waxing, but some people are looking for some more explanation. What is waxing?
So I think now Filson, if you buy a waxed cotton piece from Filson, they have this like high pressure roller that takes heated wax and like presses it into the fabric, and it really is like in the fabric and it's not going to come back out again. Early on if you're looking at like, I mean, during the gold rush, they were waxing cotton during the early 20th century. And so they probably were using a lot of different techniques. It was roughly, you know, heating wax and trying to really press it into the fabric. It would be sort of the equivalent if you know, tried to drip a candle onto something and you had an iron and, you know, you'd need a really hot iron and it would be maybe like a little patchy. There's different techniques that were tried over time. They've gotten pretty good at it now, but the idea is basically coating cotton, because the cotton will absorb, is nice absorbent material, and basically having a wax coating on the outside of the cotton so that it really is basically as water repellent as possible.
Thank you. And we've got several people wondering if the construction of the pocket is because this was a left-handed hunter. Do you think that's possible? Well,
I think the thing with that is that then you wouldn't have the original pocket. They would this one would be missing because that's basically the same spot if you're shooting the gun on the other side. So I think the fact that there's a pocket on each side, that's the piece that makes it think it's not a left-handed thing. It's some sort of special purpose of this pocket.
All right, last question about this jacket. Can you tell us what the lining looks like?
It is not lined. It is, because it's got this double layer of the cotton, it is basically just if you looked on the inside, it would kind of look the same on the inside. And of course the wearer would have a shirt underneath it and probably a vest or something. So it wouldn't be comfortable to have that directly against the skin, but this is the top layer of probably a multi-layered outfit.
Great, thank you, Clara.
Okay, great. Okay, so next I want to talk about this dress, which also the cost of materials comes up here, because this is a dress that I was so excited to have, to find in the collection and then to display it in Seattle style, because it is a dress that is a larger size. If you've gone to a lot of fashion exhibits, you have probably seen a lot of really tiny garments. museums like the Met, that's often because they are getting a lot of designer samples and they're getting things straight from the runway, so it's model-sized garments. But a lot of historical garments, if you see a bunch of 19th century dresses, you might have marveled about how just impossibly tiny they all seem. And some people kind of chalk that up to, oh, it's, you know, nutrition was different, people were smaller. But a lot of fashion historians have kind of questioned that, and there's this idea of survival bias, and the fact that garments and fabrics used to be so much more expensive, so much more valuable, that things really did get cut up and made and remade many times. So something that is a larger garment, there's a lot of fabric there. It can be remade, it can be restyled. There's a lot of opportunities to make it into something else. Whereas something that is so tiny for, you know, that one aunt who, you know, no one could fit into her clothes, that's the item that's, you know, it's not going to get worn as a Halloween costume. There's not enough fabric to make it into something else. It stays in good condition. It ends up in museum collections. So it's really a treat to find something that's a larger size. So this is a dress that we have that was worn by a Seattle woman, Mrs. George T. Myers. And I also love about this dress is that it's from the 1920s. And if you know your fashion history, the sort of fashionable ideal body of the 1920s was like a straight column. If you see illustrations of flappers, it's like a woman who has no curves. She's just kind of straight up and down, small, kind of a youthful, athletic build. And I've seen fashion exhibits sometimes at museums that, you know, they know this, and so they try to dress these 1920s dresses on like a column-shaped mannequin. But of course, we know that not all women just sort of magically became, you know, waif-sized in the 1920s. And I've been surprised dressing mannequins with dresses that seem, you know, to be small, how much body you can actually build up underneath them and how much work the dresses actually do to kind of create that fashionable silhouette, even if the woman doesn't have that kind of what would have been the ideal silhouette at the time. So this dress, the mannequin that we purchased for this was a modern size 18 or 20. So she did not have what would be considered the ideal 1920s body, but the dress actually is very cleverly designed to really kind of show off her beautiful body and sort of make it look like it's the ideal 1920s body. So first of all, the black velvet kind of absorbs light, and it doesn't, the pattern is very strategically placed so that the places where, you know, that if it was a pattern all over, you would see the pattern kind of warping as it moved over her curves, over her chest, over her rear. But that's where there's no pattern. That's where there's just this black velvet that creates this kind of straight up and down. And then the decorations are added kind of all around that sort of to fool the eye into sort of looking straight up and down and creating this kind of column shape on her body. Then the embellishment is reserved specifically for the hips. And so we have this beautiful decoration on the hips of this garment. And so even though I just said that the 1920s shape was very columnar, the exception was that there was a kind of alternate style in the 1920s known as the robe de style, spelled style, which was basically a dress that was still kind of straight up and down in the front and the back, but that had wider hips. These are not great photos, but this is the two examples that we have so both a photo and in the collection. So this is a robe de style gown that was for sale at Frederick and Nelson in Seattle. You can see the wider hips, but still kind of very flat in the front and back. And then this is kind of a terrible picture, but it is because it's on a hanger. But this is a wedding dress we have in the collection that has actual hip panniers, kind of like in the 18th century, of these wider hips on the side. And so this woman, you know, the hips, she has natural, beautiful hips. And so putting the decoration there, this is not a robe de style gown, but it's kind of a nod to that style, and that, you know, keeping the columns straight up and down in the front and bottom, front and back, but then, you know, emphasizing the hips because that would be a fashionable part of the body. And then unrelated to all that, but just a really beautiful detail on this dress is that it has these delicate sleeves with this netting and this silver, and people are going to ask me what this material is, and I honestly don't know. It's very soft to the touch. I think it's some thread that is wrapped in some kind of soft silver material. It must not be real silver because it has not tarnished at all. It is still beautiful and luminous. and it's just kind of light and it's not stiff at all, so that it, you know, it kind of goes with the sort of butterfly effect of the sleeves, and it's just a really, really lovely detail on this dress. So what questions do you have about this dress?
Lots of excitement about the beadwork. Lots of comments about how beautiful the beadwork is, the embroidery. I'm wondering if it's hand or machine.
Oh, I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure that it is hand done, because you can see all the threads on the back, and they're not, they have that sort of handwork look, that it's not just like chunked out of a machine. It really looks like it's all hand stitched. And that actually, the beading, my theory is the beading is really what saved this dress, because you can't cut this dress up into anything else without butchering the beading pattern. You can't make it a smaller dress. And so I think the beading is what saved this dress.
Do you know the beading technique?
So one thing I often say at the beginning of these programs is that even though I've got the fancy title of curator, I don't know everything. And I'm actually not an experienced seamstress myself, so I don't know what the beading technique is called. And I apologize. There's many areas of my knowledge that could be improved.
Well, lots of the audience thinks that it looks like tambour beading. So lots of comments about that. And somebody wondering if those are coats of arms that are beaded into the dress.
You know, that is kind of what it looks like. I would doubt that it's like her coat of arms or something like that. But that's the kind of, I mean, it looks like coats of arms, but it also, to me, a little bit, there was a kind of craze for Egyptian and Aztec patterns in the 1920s. And so to me, it looks like also a very vague, kind of westernized idea of what an Aztec pattern would be. That's the other thing that it kind of looks to me like.
Thank you. Can you clarify what the front and the back of the dress are?
Oh, that's fair. So in this slide, the front is on the left and the back is on the right. So we actually are missing a piece of the dress. So there's this kind of silver triangle that either there would be a slip underneath it or another layer of the dress. But the way that we had it in the collection, it had this super, super deep V, and that just really isn't how it would have been worn. So we added just kind of a prop cover to the front of the dress. But it is, the front of the dress is on the left and the back of the dress is on the right.
Great. Those are all the questions.
Okay, great. Okay, so next I want to talk about this amazing Howard Blair gown and coat that was made in Seattle. Howard Blair is a local designer. His heyday was like the 50s, 60s, 70s. And as you might guess from this, his specialty was gowns, evening gowns, wedding gowns, pageants. This is a gown and coat that were made specifically for a fashion show. He and a few other designers in Seattle were asked to create garments with, to celebrate trade with Japan, which actually, this is in the 50s, so it's not long after World War II, but promoting Japanese goods and what you could do with them. And so this is 50 yards of Japanese silk that he used to make this dress. It was for a fashion show. So it is meant to be attention grabbing. It actually has little bells on the inside of the skirt and of the coat to make it, as if the rest of the outfit wouldn't grab your attention, you would also hear it coming. And I picked this one because one of the tough things about displaying something like this is that I wanted everyone to get all of the views of it, but it's only ever possible usually to get one view. So if you had seen this on display, you would have seen it basically like this, of kind of a front and side view of how it was displayed. But what you would have missed, first of all, is the back of the coat. And so there's this sort of cape-like draping on the back with this bow. And then this incredible kind of swath of fabric on the back. Again, this is 50 yards of silk that he used for this. And it's really, the purpose of it is to show off just this fabric. And in like any good fashion designer, I think he knew his fashion history. So this reminds me immediately of 18th century robe à la Francais, or dresses, the the other term for these were sack back dresses, less elegant sounding than robe à la française. But these dresses that had, that, you know, the front view would have been corseted, it's got these tiny waists, but the back was this opportunity to show off fabric. And certainly in the 18th century, this is very expensive, opulent fabric. So the purpose of having this trailing back of the dress was to show off, you know, whatever gorgeous fabric you purchased for this dress, and that this was an opulent piece. So that's kind of the vibe that I get from the back of this coat is just, look at this incredible fabric. The other thing that I wish I could have showed people when this is on display is just what the dress looks like on its own. So one thing is just this incredible bow that's at the back of this dress. Again, just a huge explosion of fabric at the back of this dress. And then of course, a lot of people have noticed the sort of interesting placement of the tassels on this dress. A little saucy, you wonder, just again, very attention grabbing. But when you see it with the coat on, you only see those 3 tassels in the front, and you miss that actually the tassels continue all the way around the bodice. So you can see there's kind of 2 on the sides here, and then there's this arrangement of 3 on the back. And so that it kind of continues around the dress in this zigzag pattern, which is really just, again, a detail that there's just so much in this dress, and you didn't get all of those details if you saw it on display. So what questions about this dress?
Well, people are wondering, was this ever sold? And if so, how much would it be worth?
That is a good question. It was not ever sold. So Howard Blair, the designer himself, I met with him when we were working on the Seattle Style exhibit, and this was one that he had kept in his own collection as just kind of a star piece. I think that there were some other fashion shows that he submitted it for. It may have traveled. So this was really only ever a showpiece that the designer himself did hang on to. So it did not sell. I don't know a lot about his prices based on the fact that he was custom making all of these pieces. I can't imagine he was giving them away cheaply. I would guess, again, this is a guess, but in today's money, I would think he would be crazy for selling this anything less than $1,000, if not 3 times that.
Thank you. Was this a heavy dress? How much did it weigh?
Very heavy. I don't have exact weight on it, but again, it's between the dress and the coat, it's 50 yards. And so although the dress has some very hefty hang loops in it, and we actually were able to put it on a hanger, but the coat is just massive, and the box that we had it in was very heavy. So you'd be pretty tired wearing this dress all day.
There's a couple of people wondering, you've mentioned 50 yards of fabric. Do you happen to know how wide those 50 yards would have been?
I don't, although I would guess, I guess I don't know if all of the widths are standard, but it seems like it would be like a wider, like it would be silly to have this be only 40 inches, although I guess depending on what the weave is. Oof, that's a good question. I don't know.
Okay. Another question that you may or may not know the answer to, one person is wondering, could you give us an idea of what would have been worn on the head or in the hair of somebody wearing this dress?
Oh, we do have a picture of, well, it's a very hard to, there was a picture in the newspaper of the model wearing this dress, and I don't believe that she had a hat or a headpiece on. I think that she just had styled hair. She would have worn gloves with this. But I believe it would not have a headpiece with it.
Okay, thank you. How do we store this garment?
Well, that's a good question. Currently, it is still in its box, having returned from the Seattle Style exhibit. We actually, the exhibit closed in October, but we freeze everything before it goes back into storage, just in case any bugs hitched a ride on their way home. So it is still in the box that came back from the exhibit, waiting to be frozen, and I have to figure out how to best store it. Like I said, it has the dress has some very strong hang loops, but I don't know if they are like you have to think in terms of like 50 years for storing things. I don't know that the hang loops will last it that long. So I'll have to make an assessment. It may need a custom box to kind of get both parts of it to be sort of safely stored.
Thank you. And one person's wondering, what is the white seam looking thing on the bottom portion of the dress? Does it detach?
It does not detach. It's just a little, it is like a little decorative piece of rope. It's a piece of trimming. So it's kind of white and it's got, I think, a little iridescence in it. And it's just a little trim to kind of cover this very heavy seam where all of this pleated fabric would connect to the kind of smooth part of the dress.
Thank you. One last question, which is actually from a few people curious about the designer. What do you know about the designer? Can you tell us a little bit? Is he around? Is there any documentation?
So Howard Blair, last I heard he is still alive. He is in his later 80s. He started designing when he was in high school. And he was making prom dresses for his friends. He's just quite a character. As you can tell from the dress, opulent style is his thing. And so he worked out of his home, and his mother, and I think he did hire some other seamstresses at sort of the peak of his career, but basically was working out of his home as there are other sort of designers that made their reputation in Seattle, and a lot of them were working out of their homes. They didn't have giant stores. That was kind of the most, and they were doing a lot of sort of small batch production for special clients. So he made wedding dresses was one of his specialties. He made hundreds and hundreds of wedding dresses in his career. The other things we have in the collection, we have a gown that was worn by a Miss Seafair, dresses that he also made for like mothers of the bride or people attending weddings. He was a specialty designer that had a devoted list of clients in Seattle. There was a Miss Washington pageant contestant to Miss America pageant that he dressed her for that. He's a really fun character.
Thank you.
Okay, or should we move on?
That's it. That was the last one.
Great. Okay, so the final piece is, and in keeping with my backdrop, and the most Seattle, is this wonderful, wonderful World's Fair patterned jacket. It's actually a two-piece. It's a shirt and a skirt. And the shirt, it buttons down the front, and there's a little, it's kind of hard to tell because of the pattern, but there's this little pointed kind of sailor back to it. And then the skirt has this rope belt, and for display, we put a crinoline under it. So the skirt's sticking out, it would have been worn with a petticoat like that, but it does not stick out like that naturally. So this is an outfit that was made locally by a manufacturer called Foster Hochberg. Longtime Seattleites, if you remember where the old REI was, that most recently was a Value Village on Capitol Hill, that's one of the locations that was a factory for Foster Hochberg in the 50s and 60s. So Foster Hochberg, their specialty was casual clothing, cotton clothing, a lot of prints, women, girls, teens, and they sold pieces all over the country. Particularly, they said places with similar casual aesthetics and sort of mild seasons, because a lot of cotton clothing would not, if you lived in Alaska, that maybe wouldn't be very practical. So Miami, Arizona, California. So when the World's Fair was coming up in Seattle, so in '61, the year before the fair, they started planning for creating a line that would celebrate the fair and stuff that they could sell both in Seattle to fairgoers, but then also all over the country. And if it seems a little strange that someone, like in Miami would buy a Seattle themed outfit, I think we forget what a huge deal the Seattle World's Fair was. And while I was researching this program, I actually didn't realize this, but where's the statistic? That the 1962 World's Fair was the only World Expo sanctioned by the Bureau of International Expositions held in the US since World War I or World War II. So the big New York fair that happened a couple years later, that was actually not officially sanctioned by the Bureau of Expositions because it was longer than the expositions are supposed to be. And then other ones like Expo 74 in Spokane were specialized expos as opposed to world expos. They were shorter in length. So I guess that's a lot of asterisks that I'm giving for that. But just to say that it was a really, really big deal that Seattle had this international World's Fair, official World's Fair, and there was national interest in this. And so the Space Needle was something that, you know, was like hip and cool, that someone in a totally different state would be interested in wearing. So you know, Foster Hochberg kind of correctly saw that this would be a very popular thing to do. So in 1961, they started making plans to commission this print and then the subsequent garments. So the person who designed the illustrations for the print was named Jerry Abbott. She worked for the Seattle Times as a fashion illustrator. Her main thing was she had a feature called Seen in a Seattle Store that was illustrations of fashionable garments that you could purchase. And so she had access to the fairgrounds while they were being constructed, and meeting with architects and seeing kind of design renderings of how things were going to look, and came up with basically two versions of the print, one that was kind of denser and one that was more spread out that would kind of have different uses. And these are not as great photos, but these are just some other examples of different garments that we have in the collection that use one or both of the patterns. So on the left is this kind of 1960s wiggle dress that's kind of nice and fitted. This one that's kind of in the middle this is almost the same skirt as what you saw earlier, but then with a different top that's kind of more spread out. And then this is an interesting one on the right, is that this is the same skirt that has three different shirt options. So one is the same kind of camp shirt that the main piece that I'm talking about has, but then there's this kind of cropped short sleeve one, and then this kind of longer tunic that could have been worn over a skirt or over pedal pushers. The print was actually produced in three different colorways. If the number of items we have in the collection is any indication, the blue and green colorway that you see was by far the most popular. This was the official colorway. This is the official colors of the fair. And I feel like are also like the unofficial colors of Seattle. I mean, every sports team is like some version of blue and green. Like these are our Seattle colors. But we have just little examples, and in one case, literally a scrap of the two other colorways. So there was also an orange, yellow, and brown, and it's like we just have a scrap of fabric of that. And then there was a blue and red and pink version, and we have one skirt in that version in the collection. So now I want to just focus on the pattern. And as I mentioned, so there's kind of a denser version, and then there's kind of a more spread out version, and they could be used for different purposes, different garments. If you're a little confused, so this is the International Fountain. This is plumes of water coming out of the International Fountain. Obviously the Space Needle, the Science Pavilion, which we know is the Seattle Science Center. The monorail to me looks like the one thing that was clearly based on like a design drawing. It just looks, it's like a little too slick. I feel like the real monorail is just a little more blocky than that. And it's interesting, so the pattern on the left isn't just that everything's closer together. There is more detail on that pattern. So for example, the monorail, so on the right, there's kind of this vague outline of a building here, and then there's just a couple lines here to indicate maybe a building. But over here, even though it's smaller, there's like more, you know, layers to this building. There's this flag here, there's more of the building on the right. The Space Needle over here has, there's like these I think people underneath the needle kind of heading over to see it. And then on the right, so that's on the left, and then on the right, there's no people. It's much cleaner. So kind of the more you look at it, you see that there's density both in just the proximity of the print, and then also these added details. And so then the company was able to sort of take these two patterns, and where it made sense to have kind of that energetic busyness in the pattern versus having the kind of more spread out kind of breathing room of that pattern. So I'm going to flip back just to the dress, so to this garment. And I like that it has both of them. So you get kind of the busyness of the top, and then the kind of spread out pattern on the skirt. So that is, that's the end for that one. And that's, so I take questions about this. And then if there is time, if there's lingering questions about any of the other pieces.
Okay, great. Let's start with questions about this dress. Now there is quite a lot of interest in this pattern and the fabric. So people are wondering, are these patterns available for purchase somewhere just on the fabric? Also somebody's wondering if there's a scarf that was made.
I have not seen a scarf in this particular pattern, but there are other fabrics that were made in World's Fair, in the different World's Fair prints. As far as I know, these were only ever made as garments, but there were companies that made just lengths of yardage that could be turned into clothing. So we have, there's a really fabulous dress we have in the collection that was made in a totally different fabric, but this sort of Space Needle themed World's Fair fabric that someone then sewed a dress into. I don't know of any place that produces this fabric. I don't know who owns the rights to it, whether it is, you know, Jerry Abbott's estate or the estate of Foster Hochberg doesn't exist. I don't know if that means it's in public domain. I do know if someone made it, I would totally buy this outfit. And I sense that is why you're asking. I would love it if this was available for purchase. As far as I know, it is not.
I think you are not alone in that enthusiasm.
These do come up on eBay every so often, not for cheap, but if you can set an alert, maybe one will pop up, but they certainly, they're pretty awesome.
One question is wondering where the fabric was manufactured.
Ooh, I don't know. It wouldn't have been manufactured here. As far as I know, the factories here were sewing. They were not like cotton weaving factories. Probably though in the 50s and 60s, there was still quite a few mills in the US. So I would think that it would be made in the US, probably on the East Coast, I think was where a lot of the mills were. So it probably would have been woven and printed, you know, the cotton, I mean, this is very basic cotton within the print, would probably have been made elsewhere.
And one person is wondering if the print was silk screened, and was that the common print technique for that era?
Trying to think. It probably is silk screened. It does not, it's definitely just on the surface. The print isn't going all the way through it. This is testing the limits of my knowledge about making techniques. I think that, although we're trying to think about what would make most sense, it's interesting because the denser pattern is definitely an all over pattern that could be some sort of, the repeat is, it's just like it's just a basic repeat. Whereas the lighter pattern is like, it has this sort of density of the pattern and then like just the color above it, which, maybe the way that it's done is like, it just kind of repeats pattern and then, lighter bits. Gosh, I hope that's not one of my grad school classmates.
Well, more question about the print. What are the lines coming out of the Space Needle?
I don't know. I think that to me, it's sort of, I think it's sort of like light. It's just as if there's like uplighting and it's just like, but I think to me, it's just like, it's adding energy to it. It's kind of creating it as this focal point. I think they're maybe indicating light, but I think otherwise they're sort of artistic, energetic lines.
Good answer. Okay, this is related to the skirt. Is the skirt inverted box pleated, and is the fabric rectangular and pleated in, or are there gores? And this one came up when you were showing the first piece.
Yeah. So this is one of the limitations of looking at it just on the screen rather than flipping it over. But I am seeing, I mean, it is not like, it's clearly not just cartridge pleated all the way around. There are sort of like these indents where there's more of a gathering of fabric and then these kind of flatter areas. So I think their box pleats seems to be what from looking at this picture, but yeah, no, I don't remember there being gores. I think it is a big that it is kind of pleated all around, or it gets the fullness using the pleating rather than adding panels. There's not a lot of seams in this skirt. There's probably maybe one or two, but it's not, you know, seamed all around.
Thank you. Are there other examples in the MOHAI collection that feature Seattle building iconography, such as the Space Needle? And if so, do you have any favorites?
Well, I think this is my favorite. But we have, well, there is another dress that we have that I mentioned that uses a totally different, it was just made from a fabric that was produced during the World's Fair that has, it's funny because it has the Space Needle, but the whole print, they clearly had less active access to the really current drawings that this, like I said, this is a pretty close, the monorail is like a little sketchy, but overall this really looks like all of the scenes. And this other one we have, like the monorail looks super space age, and there's a bunch of other buildings that's like, what even is that? But that is clever because they cut out the Space Needle and then applicate it specifically. So it wasn't just using the print, they were also cutting out parts of the print and then using it on the bodice of the dress. And that's really clever. Wish I could show it to you right now. And then we also had a shirt that was in the exhibit that was made for Seattle's centennial in 1952. So that was actually before the Space Needle was built. And it's got all of these sort of sites in Seattle, but it's funny, it's not things that we would usually think of as sort of iconic, mainly because our most iconic thing had not been built yet. So there's, well, first of all, there's a lot of outdoor activities being shown, people skiing, people out on the water. But then there's a stadium, and it doesn't quite look like UW Stadium or Memorial Stadium. It's clearly one of them, but it like looks a little funny. There's the floating bridge is one of the things featured on it. So that's a kind of fun shirt because it's you know, what was really iconic in the 50s before we had sort of our most iconic item in Seattle.
Okay, we have another question about the dress, and I also just wanted to open it up and see if there were any additional questions about other pieces that were presented. This question about the dress: which technique would be easier to keep the pattern registration, clean roller printing or silk screening?
Unfortunately, my printmaking knowledge is leaving my brain at the moment. And if anyone else in the chat thinks that they know the answer to that, I would definitely be interested, because I don't know a lot about print registration. I apologize. This is one thing that's really great about the in-person behind the scenes is that we often, when I am stumped, and I honestly, frankly, often am, that we often have really knowledgeable people that attend the program and they can answer questions, and it can be a kind of fun back and forth. So it is a limitation of this program that you're stuck with just my knowledge.
Well, Clara, we appreciate you sharing your knowledge. Thank you so much. This has been so fun to look at all of these pieces. And someone's asking if this is the first time we've held this program via Zoom. It is. Usually you would be in a room with a few other people and seeing the garments out of the collection up close, but you can't get too close. So this is an exciting opportunity to get really into the details here. And we appreciate you joining us tonight. Do you have any final comments you want to share about the garments, Clara?
I don't, but I was going to talk about the photo package.
Oh, wonderful.
So if you enjoyed all of these beautiful garment details, as I mentioned, we're trying something. This is a new program, and so we're trying also a new offering that if you'd like to purchase these 8 digital images as a way to just sort of enjoy the program and a way to support MOHAI, there's a link that you'll be sent via email, I believe, about that. It's $20 for the photo package. And there's I think a discount of $5 for members. You can use it as a Zoom backdrop, as I did, or any other personal use. Post it, enjoy them, just things that, just to enjoy, photos to enjoy. And if you want to get up close to especially the prints, those of you who actually understand printmaking, to get kind of a closer look at this image and figure out how it was done. So these are the images that are available that are part of that package. Let me check. I feel like I had a couple other concluding notes that I wanted to say. As I mentioned the sort of in-person behind the scenes, I just want to say that we will do this program again in person It is a great program that is conducive to small groups. So of course we won't do it unless it is safe to do so, but do, watch the MOHAI website and sign up for our newsletters and things, because this will definitely be a program that will be offered in person again in the future when it's safe to do so. And I also just want to thank our programs team again, Nicole and Rachel, and Kelsey was also behind the scenes. That there's a lot of support and things going on to make this evening possible, and so it was. Thank you so much to them, and I will pass it back over to Nicole now.
Well, thank you so much, Clara. This was really fun. It was great to see so many people turn out to view our collection. And one of the things I love about Behind the Seams is there are always amazing questions. So that's really fun to see. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and just all of your incredible insights and your enthusiasm for beautiful fashion. We're glad to be able to share it with you. As Clara mentioned, we're really excited about this photo package. It's unusual that we get to offer something like this. You can actually find it now on our calendar page on our website, mohai.org, if you want to check it out. And we will deliver the photos after you purchase them almost immediately. You can download them and start having fun with them. And it's also a chance to learn more about our extensive photo collection online and other images you might be excited to see. I also want to tell everybody that we are doing another digital program coming up this month, May 20th. We are doing a History Cafe online, Resilience Past and Present in the Chinatown International District. So information about that will be on our website also soon at mohai.org. We hope you'll join us. And if you've enjoyed this program, please consider supporting MOHAI during this unforeseen closure. We're so happy to be able to offer these things to you, and we would really love to keep making great programs and sharing the amazing knowledge of our staff like Clara through this and other work. So thank you, everybody. Let's give Clara one big virtual round of applause. And we hope to see you
everyone for joining.
Come back to us again. Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Have a great night.